when you look at the world around us and there's just all this stuff going on, there's a lot of times where we as humans get to this point where, like, we just wish someone was in control, who knew what they were doing, who could see all the things ahead of them and make perfect decisions and just fix all this stuff that we're going through. It doesn't matter what country you're in, it doesn't matter what time period you're in. These are always the ways that humanity would feel. That's actually even part of the reason that Israel, God's people, ever got a king in the first place. They were supposed to be following God, and God alone, and God would use leaders to lead them, but Israel started saying, like, we want a king. We want a king like all the other nations, not just following God, but someone put in charge of us who can follow God, and we can follow them. And God tells Israel, it's like, look, if you want that, you can have that, but you gotta understand there's going to be a lot of bad stuff that happens. Humanity, when it's given power, when it's given authority, all the paths that they're going to go down are going to be miserable for you. They're going to take your children, they're going to put them into indentured servitude, slavery. They're going to work in the palace for royalty. Things aren't going to be good for you. Your children are going to be sent off to war. Like, these are just the things that come with having a human king. These are the kind of things you want. And Israel is like, yeah, we want to be like everybody else. We want a king. They're thinking, like, if we had a human to follow, then things would be easier. Then we would finally be getting what we want. What they learn the hard way, that humanity does not lead well. It even starts with the first king, Saul. Saul is chosen by God, and then Saul does such a bad job of leading Israel that God actually says he regrets having chose Saul to be king. And so David rises up, and now we're going to follow David. And David does an all right job, and eventually Solomon comes around. He does an okay job, and even these ones who do an okay job actually have a lot of miserable moments where they do really bad things. And Solomon is really smart, really wise, but even he gets corrupted by all the power and just everything else that feeds into his life. Until eventually we just get to a string of just bad king after bad king after bad king. And the occasional good kings we get are rare, and even they have their pretty magnificent blunders along the way. And Isaiah now comes and tells us, look, not only are your kings bad, but Israel, you too have just kind of lost it. And so God has to go about making things different. You have to face judgment. But then there comes this word about the coming Messiah, who we know as Jesus. There comes this word that someone will finally rise up, and they will lead all of this right. They will be a part of Jesse. It's kind of a popular passage. You've probably heard it before. Maybe you've heard it before. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. It's Isaiah 11:1. It's kind of phrased strangely, because on one hand, we have a shoot. Something is coming out of the stump of Jesse, but at the same time, Jesse himself is coming out of the root of this shoot, of this Messiah. So whoever this Messiah is, there's something miraculous and supernatural about him. He's both before and after Jesse. Now, this Messiah that's going to come is finally going to give us a king that we can follow, a king that we would desire, a king that we can trust. And the ways in which Isaiah goes on to describe this king is like the ultimate king that Israel could have ever desired, that any human could have ever desired, because the things that this king is perfect at are the kind of qualities that you would want in any king, any president, any kind of political leader. First off, it's going to be someone with with great understanding who's in charge of us, and great wisdom who's in charge of us. And wisdom, that's a loaded word. You might remember back in the Garden of Eden, we were given an option. We could either follow God and therefore get our wisdom through God, or we could eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. We could get wisdom through this tree, this forbidden wisdom. And we chose the tree. And ever since then, we've been getting our wisdom in incorrect ways, and we in our humanity don't even know how to process wisdom right. We didn't receive it in the way that God wanted us to receive it through Him. Eventually you get Solomon, who he's offered kind of like the ultimatum again. Look, Solomon, I'll give you anything you want. You just tell me. It's Solomon's magic genie moment. God's like, one wish, I will grant you. And Solomon's like, give me wisdom. In other words, he's facing the tree all over again. Solomon, giving you any choice you want. You can choose the tree. You can choose the power and the riches and everything that comes with this tree. You can do that. But Solomon chooses, no, I want the wisdom that's from God. I choose wisdom. And so Solomon is gifted with wisdom. And this Messiah, this leader, this royal king who is to come, he is going to have that kind of wisdom as well. And that's the kind of wisdom that just blows your mind. If you ever come across someone with just incredible wisdom to a point that, like, you don't even know how to explain it. I had a college professor who was that for me. Just every time he spoke, there were classes I would sit through with other professors where, like, I didn't hear a word. I was just sometimes bored out of my mind. But this professor, like, I just wanted to hear everything. I would soak it all in. He spoke in such a way that, like, I could feel the Holy Spirit moving while he spoke. I also had another professor who I took copious notes. I'm not a note taker. I don't learn very well when I'm taking notes. I just have to listen and soak it in. But this guy, everything he said, I just wanted to write it all down. Both of these teachers were great in a kind of wisdom that I had rarely seen in other areas of my pursuit of God. And I loved it, and I soaked it in. Solomon was like that in the time that he lived. You know, we, all throughout the ages, we've had great philosophers and teachers that stand out in history, and we still read their stuff today. Solomon was like that in his time. The Bible tells us that people, like, from all over the nations were, like, coming to hear this guy, to hear his wisdom and the way in which he would apply this wisdom to his reign and everything else he was doing. I mean, Solomon was like the dude of his time. Maybe you have someone like that in your life, or maybe it's someone that we all have. Like C.S. Lewis for me would be a public figure that scratches that itch for wisdom for me. When he speaks, I'm caught up in like the interest of what he's saying. There's almost like this like, I don't even know how to say it. There's just something about his words that keep bringing me in deeper and keep pushing my mind towards Jesus to learn more. And so, Isaiah tells us that there is coming a king who will be great in this wisdom. He will have it perfectly for us, and the Holy Spirit will grant it to him. Not only that, not only wisdom, but understanding. And that sounds like the same thing to us. Yeah, wisdom, understanding, it's all the same word, Jamie, just looking at a thesaurus, you know? But this idea of understanding, or Binah, which it was in Hebrew, it was more of like a discernment of sorts, not just street smarts and deep smarts, but the ability to put those smarts where they belong and discern how to use them properly. So think of it this way. You know what makes a good judge? It's not someone who opens a law book and says, okay, you've committed this crime, let me see, section 457, point B, yes, here is the result of your actions right here. That doesn't make a good judge, because then anyone can be a judge. All you have to do is know how to read a rule book. What makes a good judge is someone who has the wisdom of how the courts are supposed to work, has the understanding of why you're judging in the first place, and the ultimatum that you hope for the person on the other end that you're judging. And they take all of that, and they take the story, and they take the verdict, and they take prior cases where something like this has happened before and what they did in those cases. They take all of that collective wisdom together, and then they discern as a judge how to apply it to the situation that they are in. You've had that in your own life, right? With your children or with a friend. They do something and you use your collective experience of when you've had this moment before and all the results that have come based on, with kids, maybe like the punishment you used, how it resulted, what was effective in the past, what wasn't. And then you use all that discernment to put the law into place. I would actually suggest that the Old Testament law, one of the problems that we have throughout history is people look at the Old Testament law, and because it's sacred, which it is, they'll look at it and they will apply it like point blank sometimes to the situations at hand. So they'll take a law that is in the Bible and then just like, this person committed this crime, use this result in the Bible right against them. But what if we were to suggest, as I'm pretty sure there was one book I read where the scholar was going this direction, I just can't remember where it was, but if I remember right, their point essentially was, like, the Old Testament law are examples. Okay, so-and-so did this, here's the result. That's not to say, like, this is the ultimatum for every time this is committed for the rest of eternity. Rather, this is how we dealt with it in this situation. So when you find yourself as a judge in a situation similar to this down the road, know that this is what we did before, and you'll want to work probably within the bounds of this. See, what makes a good judge is someone who takes all the wisdom together and then discerningly puts it into the situation that they're in. Maybe you've met a judge like that. I went to court with someone once, and it was a real bummer to me. What they were getting in trouble for was a minor offense, but I knew that because of the situation, the minor offense could blow up into something that it wasn't and didn't need to be. And I was there with the discernment, like, that it doesn't have to go that direction. But you never know what's going to happen in a legal situation. What if it does explode in the way that it could? And so I'm sitting there nervous this whole time, praying, please God, don't let this turn into the kind of legality that it could be. And the judge does have some verdicts and some results that were appropriate for the small minor problem. But to the place in which he could have taken it, he looked at the situation. He even saw me as a pastor and mentioned, like, it looks like you have some good friends and good support here. And the person mentioned that I was their pastor. It's like, oh, okay. Like, took into account, like, this person standing in front of you is not a bad person. And using all of that, they were able to come up with a result and a verdict that made sense, not just by the law alone, but by the discernment and wisdom to put the law into place. Imagine then, when Isaiah is saying a king is coming where the Holy Spirit will anoint him, not just for the wisdom to know all these things and how it all works out, but the ability to understand, to discern, to Binah, all of this stuff. Come up with the right verdicts, come up with the right interactions and things like that. A king that we can trust because he can't be wrong. And what about, since we're already on this judging track, not just a judge who can discern correctly, but a judge who does not take into account your appearance, your socioeconomic situation, your class situation, the rumors about you, the gossip about you, the lies about you. What if there was a judge who was blind to all that stuff? What if this king was blind to all that stuff? And that sounds crazy to us. Because, most kings get to where they are by some kind of stretch of, a lot of times, power already. Think of the kings of old, right? You become a king because you were born a king. Therefore, you're raised in royalty, you become royalty. In the ancient world, you don't really have this underdog. I mean, there's some stories where that comes through. But with most kings, a king is born a king. The underdogs, though, that would be unusual in an ancient world. Today, that's sometimes unusual as well. Occasionally, someone who is born into poverty and difficulty rises to the top. But then a lot of times, someone who's already known riches and power and wealth their whole life gets to the top. Because in order to take like the high seats and things like that, you need lots of money for advertising and all kinds of stuff. You have to be primed for those situations. And yet Isaiah tells us, imagine someone who's blind to all the things that make minorities and poor people poor. Imagine someone who sees all the meek people out there and judges them with equity, that they're treated the same way that the rich and powerful are. Imagine a world in which we all are able to live on a scale where that power of the king, he treats us and judges us fairly and in the same way that makes sense to each and every situation that he comes across. I mean, that's unthinkable. That's not how humanity works. And yet Isaiah is telling us, out of the shoot of Jesse, out of the root of Jesse, there will be someone who will come and will judge appropriately. And it brings to my mind, in Greek mythology, maybe you've seen the picture before somewhere, but in Greek mythology, there was a goddess who had a blindfold on, and they're holding scales to weigh out, like, judgment on any situation, and they hold a sword as well to execute judgment on any situation. But the point of that blindfold shows you that not only among Christianity, but among all different kinds of cultures, there's this understanding that when it comes to judging often is unfair, because we judge people very quickly. I don't have the stats right in front of me. I wrote about it in my first book, Taste of Jesus, but one of the facts that I came across is, like, your ability to judge someone is so quick. Like, I think it's within a second, maybe if not, then let's say a few seconds. You see someone and you judge instantly if you can or can't trust them based on how they look, how they act, who they are, so on and so forth. Which means, people like me, we get judged for all different kinds of reasons. For me, I'm told I have an angry resting face, that when I'm just chill, I look mad. And that gives people, I think, reason to like, if in their instant judgment of me is like, I don't like this guy, he doesn't strike me as a fun person. And I've had people judge me, I think, in those ways before. And as people get to know me, they realize I'm not that way. Casey, for example, we went to college together, and when he was first getting to know me, he talks about, that was Jamin's jerk phase. He was a jerk back then. Now, it's not just because I have a resting angry face. I was kind of a jerk back then. But as he got to know me, he saw, like, Jamin for who he really is. He didn't just have to judge him by his angry face. But we look around at our own society, and we see that judgment goes wrong all the time on people, right? I mean, that's what this movement to end all this injustice that happens between police officers and minorities, that's all based on people rising up saying, look at the camera evidence, look at all these situations, look at how many black people are in prison or wrongly accused or pulled over when they shouldn't be. When we look at these situations, we realize, yeah, you know what? People are being judged by the color of their skin. And then there's this hope, not just from Christians, but from people from other backgrounds and religions and cultures, that there would rise up someone with a blindfold around their eyes. And Isaiah says that that's going to be the Messiah. This king who's going to reign is not going to judge you based on how you live, based on, like, where you lived and how you were raised and the color of your skin or this and that or your resting angry face. Like, that's not the judgment. He doesn't see any of that. He's blind to all of that. You will be judged rather by if you have claimed allegiance to this king, if you're following this king, this Messiah, and have the faith that he has saved you, because it's only by him that you will be saved. And we live lives that appropriately show that we do have allegiance to him and that we are putting our faith in him. Because faith without works, of course, is dead. This whole debate back and forth. But our allegiance to King Jesus, to this King Messiah, to this perfect coming King, that is what Christianity is about. He doesn't judge us based on our appearance. That's the whole thing with Acts. Rather than just reach the Jews, he sends the Jews out who have now recently received Jesus to go and save people of all the other nations, no matter where they're from, that they would receive salvation wherever they would be from. Now, if you do want to go deeper into the injustices just in general between the judge, like the court system, the justice system, and those who are black, go to naacp.org. naacp.org. Right as soon as you get there, it's just facts after facts all the way down. That will help you go deeper into that conversation. But the good news about Jesus is that there is no injustice in him. It doesn't go wrong with him. He is good, and his judgments are made with the blindfold on. And rather, he just lives in the truth of knowing all things, the wisdom of all things, and the discernment to weigh out proper judgment. So, we've already talked about a few characteristics of this coming Messiah that Isaiah gave us, but let's get just a few more. What if they had the right answers as to what to do in every situation? What if they knew the wisdom of what was right in God's eyes? So they didn't only know God, but they knew what the proper way to live him out would be. So he gave proper counsel or advice to us as to how we should live based on any situation we come across. There's a lot of great counselors out there, but even human counselors get it wrong sometimes. I think of my own self as a pastor. I'm not a counselor, but I've taken at least one class in counseling, and it is a general pastoral job to offer counsel to people. And so occasionally I do that. And of course, there are many things where it's just you'll need to see a counselor for really getting into this because I'm only trained so far. But occasionally I'll get into conversations with people and I'll offer counsel, and sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's just finding the right technique. But this king will always give the perfect counsel. This king will have the perfect kind of might. Actually, the way that is phrased from Isaiah, and it's the same picture that's picked up in Revelation, is that Jesus's might, this Messiah's might, will all be found in his mouth. He just speaks, and it happens. That's all he needs to do. The words of his mouth are his sword. His verdicts are perfect. And when he speaks, things just happen. And we've seen this before, right? With those moments where someone speaks and you just know it has to happen. Once we had a bunch of friends over, we were playing some games, and then one of the kids had acted out, and my wife just, Beckett, she used her mom voice. You know what I'm talking about. The kids didn't just go silent, but the whole room went silent because we all heard our mom's voice in that moment, and we all were called to attention. That's the kind of voice that the Messiah will have. That mom voice, they speak and it happens. That's all the words that they need. That is enough to hear it, and the reaction is immediate. And Jesus throughout the Gospels is seen as having exousia, this supernatural authority on his words, that when he speaks, people listen, and they often are we've never heard anything like this, because he stood out in a different way. Jesus also, this Messiah, will have the perfect knowledge of God. And that's not just theological. It'd be great to have the perfect theological knowledge of the study of who God is, but we don't. There's one famous theologian back in the 13th century, St. Thomas of Aquinas. Aquinas was a great theologian, wrote a lot of works, and one day just stopped writing. And when he was asked why, he had a vision. And according to him, or at least according to legend, that vision was so extreme or incomprehensible, it just blew his mind so much that all of his work just seemed like straw. It seemed like nothing anymore. So he stopped. What good is my theology with this experience I've just had? That's kind of like humanity. We want to understand God better, and we're called to understand him better, and so we chase him to understand better and understand him on a theological level. But at some point, the mind's just blown, and we just don't know how to handle it anymore. And yet, this Messiah will have the knowledge of God. of the knowledge of God. And knowledge in the Bible oftentimes implies like relational knowledge, a relationship. It's as though Jesus could walk over to God, ask him his opinion, and come back with the answer. Kind of like what Moses would do. He would meet with God face to face. Go to God, ask the questions, get the answers, come back to the people. And this Messiah, this King, will have that as well. And this Messiah, this King, will also be grounded in the fear of God. Now look, human rulers do a lot of stupid things when they're not grounded in the fear of God. When we put our fear in all different kinds of things, whether it be rumors overseas of what might come to us, or needing to be in charge or with the most wealth or to conquer this or that, like we put our fears in places where Satan just rules over us. But when we put our fear in God, it directs our attention to right things to be afraid of, because God is the right one to be afraid of. And Isaiah's already said this in his prophetic book. He's already said, if you're going to be afraid of anything, be afraid of God. Don't be afraid of all these rumors and conspiracy theories. Ground your fear in God, because then any fear that you have will be in the right place, because he's already stronger than all these rumors and conspiracy theories. And if you're just afraid of him, that's all you need to be afraid of, because he's stronger than everything else. And the Messiah will have that correct knowledge of God, that correct fear of God. Now, since all these examples have already sounded ridiculous, like who could ever have all this perfect kingship, let's go ahead and just make it a complete fictional world while we're at it, right? Let's say that wolves will lie down and hang out with sheep. Let's say that Beckett and Jericho, that Beckett could go out and walk a lion, while Jericho goes out and walks a baby cow, a calf, right next to it. And all of them are just like laughing and having fun. The lion's licking Jericho, and no one's even afraid. This doesn't even sound ridiculous to them. Let's say that there's a ox and a bear. No, a cow and a bear, and they're out eating grass. That they become vegetarians and renounce their carnivore ways. They're eating grass and hanging out, and then a lion comes up, and you're afraid, oh no, he's going to eat them. And then the lion just starts eating some straw right next to them, and they're all hanging out, having a good time. And a woman sees her baby crawl, 1-year-old, just crawl out the front door. And as it's crawling, it sticks its hand in a hole in the ground and pulls out a snake, and the snake wraps around it and gives it a hug. It doesn't hurt it. Like, this is a fictional world of peace. And under this understanding, it's this king has done such a good job of installing peace that this is the way in which life works now. That sounds ridiculous to us, right? I mean, we can't even get dogs and cats to live in our houses peaceably sometimes. I was walking through Greece on a missions trip once, and we had this dog, because there's stray dogs and cats everywhere. This dog's just walking with us. I'm like, what a good dog, what a good dog. And then it just sees a stray cat, walks over to it, picks it up, whips it around, hits my friend with the cat, kills the cat, puts the cat back down, and then just continues walking with us. And I'm like, what just happened? And especially my friend who got hit by the cat, it's like, what's just happened? You know, like, animals don't get along like that. And yet, Isaiah tells us that that's what this is going to be like. The Messiah will put things so right that the world will be in perfect peace and perfect unison and perfect harmony. And that's a picture of the Garden of Eden. Back when animals were just brought to us to name, and we lived in peace, and we didn't eat meat and all these things. In other words, the Messiah is going to be so perfect in all these things that the world will finally be brought to peace. Things will finally be made right. We no longer will have to fear about everything wrong. Eden will return to us. And those who live with this King, who pledge allegiance to this King Jesus, who follow this Messiah Jesus and live for him and look to be made right in all of this King's wisdom and knowledge and fear of the Lord and discernment and all this stuff, those are the ones who will continue to live in this utopia of a planet that we've always dreamed of.